For 36 years, I was the daughter no one listened to. I came home early that Friday carrying a birthday gift I'd spent weeks choosing for my father. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard water running upstairs. I opened the bathroom door and my world shattered. My younger sister Candace was in the bathtub with Rick Dalton, our neighbor, a married man whose wife was home battling cancer. Candace didn't scream, didn't cover herself. She just looked at me with those cold, empty eyes and smiled. "What are you going to do, Brittany? Tell someone." She laughed softly. "No one will ever believe you." Hours later, she lured me to the lake behind our parents' house. When I refused to stay silent, she shoved me into the black water without hesitation. I surfaced, gasping, shivering, and she stood on the shore, perfectly calm. "I told you," she whispered. "No one will believe you." But Candace made one fatal mistake that night. She didn't see who was watching from the window next door. Have you ever been silenced by the person who was supposed to protect you? My name is Brittany Shaw. I'm 36 years old, a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, and I've spent my entire life trying to be seen by a family that never bothered to look. The drive to my parents' house took 40 minutes, but it felt longer. I kept glancing at the gift bag on the passenger seat, a watch I'd spent 3 weeks finding for my father's 65th birthday. I'd had his name engraved on the back. It wasn't expensive by most standards, but it was thoughtful. I wondered if anyone would notice the difference between thoughtful and expensive. In my family, they rarely did. When I pulled into the driveway of the old farmhouse outside Lancaster, Ohio, the afternoon sun was already softening toward evening. The place looked the same as always. White siding, green shutters, the big oak tree my father planted when I was born. Some people feel warmth when they come home. I felt something closer to resignation. My mother greeted me at the door with a distracted hug. "Oh, you're early. Candace isn't here yet." That was the first thing she said. Not, "How was your drive?" or "How have you been?" Just Candace. Always Candace. My younger sister was 32 and had never held a job longer than 6 months. She drifted between apartments, between boyfriends, between crises that somehow always required our mother's attention and money. Yet our mother defended her with a fierceness that bordered on desperation. I used to think it was just favoritism. But standing in that kitchen, watching my mother's hands tremble slightly as she arranged flowers for tomorrow's party, I noticed something I'd never let myself name before. It wasn't just love in her eyes when she spoke about Candace. It was fear. I set my gift bag on the counter and wandered into the living room while my mother fussed with preparations. That's when I saw the photograph on the mantel, an old picture of Candace and her former best friend Rachel, their arms wrapped around each other, both grinning like they owned the world. They'd been inseparable for years. Then one day, Rachel simply vanished from my sister's life. When I asked what happened, Candace had shrugged with that casual cruelty she wore so easily. She got jealous and crazy. I had to cut her off. I never questioned it, but looking at Rachel's smile now frozen behind dusty glass, I wondered what really happened. What did Rachel see that made her crazy? The house was too quiet. My father was out getting supplies. My mother was in the garden, and I assumed I was alone. Then I heard water running upstairs. I climbed the stairs, thinking my mother had left the faucet on. The bathroom door was slightly open, not closed, not locked, just waiting. I pushed it wider, and my world tilted. Candace was in the bathtub with Rick Dalton, our neighbor, 45 years old, married for 20 years to a woman named Linda, who was home right now fighting cancer. Candles flickered on the edge of the tub. The scene was arranged like a photograph, almost artistic. The door had been unlocked. The timing was too perfect. This wasn't a secret affair accidentally discovered. This was a stage, and I had walked directly into my role. Candace turned her head slowly. She didn't gasp. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She just looked at me with those pale blue eyes and smiled. "What are you going to do, Brittany?" Her voice was calm, almost amused. "Tell someone." She let the question hang in the steamy air. "No one will ever believe you." The words came out rehearsed, polished, like she'd been practicing them for weeks. Maybe she had. I backed out of the doorway, my heart slamming against my ribs, my mind racing to understand what I'd just witnessed. Something was very wrong here, something much bigger than an affair, and I had the sickening feeling that I'd just stepped into a trap I couldn't yet see. I stood in the hallway for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. My hands were shaking. My mind kept replaying what I had seen Candace in that bathtub, the candles, the unlocked door, and that smile. That terrible, knowing smile. I needed to tell someone. My father would listen. He had to listen. But Candace was faster than me. She always had been. By the time I came downstairs, my mother was waiting in the kitchen with her arms crossed and her jaw set tight. She pulled me aside before I could say a single word. "Brittany, we need to talk." Her voice was low, urgent, almost pleading. "Candace told me you've been acting strange. She said you were staring at her, asking inappropriate questions, making her uncomfortable." My mother's eyes darted toward the living room where Candace was now sitting with a glass of wine, looking perfectly composed. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I'm asking you, please don't cause trouble this weekend. Your father's birthday is tomorrow. Candace just got home. Can we please just have one peaceful family gathering?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell her what I had actually seen, but the words died in my throat, because I noticed something that stopped me cold. My mother's hands were trembling. Not with anger, with fear. She wasn't defending Candace out of blind maternal love. She was following instructions. She was afraid of her own daughter, and she was begging me to play along so nothing would explode. I didn't understand it then. I just knew that whatever was happening in this family ran deeper than favoritism. My mother was not my ally. She was a hostage. I stepped outside to clear my head, hoping the evening air would help me think. That's when Rick Dalton appeared from the shadows near the garage. He must have been waiting for me. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, and up close, he looked 10 years older than 45. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. "Brittany." He said my name like it was a warning. "I know what you saw earlier, and I understand you're upset, but I need you to think very carefully before you do anything." His voice was calm, rehearsed, but his hands were stuffed deep in his pockets, and I could see them moving nervously beneath the fabric. "My wife is fighting cancer. She's barely holding on. If you say anything, if you spread rumors or make accusations, you'll be the woman who destroyed a family during their darkest hour. People will remember that. They'll remember you as the person who kicked Linda when she was already down." He was trying to sound threatening, but something was off. He sounded desperate, not dangerous. Then he made a mistake. "Candace warned me you'd try something like this. She said you'd probably make a scene, try to play the victim." He caught himself too late. His face went pale as he realized what he had just admitted. Candace had warned him. Candace had prepared him. Candace had given him a script, and he was following it like an obedient dog. Rick wasn't the mastermind here. He wasn't even a partner. He was a puppet, and my sister was pulling all the strings. I said nothing. I just walked back inside my mind, racing with new understanding. Candace had planned this. She had positioned everyone exactly where she wanted them, our mother silenced by fear. Rick controlled by guilt and desperation. And me cast as the unstable older sister who couldn't be trusted. The only question was why. What did she want? What was the end game? The birthday dinner that night was supposed to be a small gathering, just family and a few neighbors. My father sat at the head of the table looking pleased but tired. He had no idea what was happening under his own roof. Our mother fluttered around nervously, refilling glasses and avoiding eye contact with me. And Candace performed beautifully. She cried twice during dinner, once when she toasted our father, her voice breaking with perfectly timed emotion. Once when she talked about how much she missed being home with family. But I watched her carefully now, and I saw what I had missed before. Before each tear, she glanced around the table to make sure everyone was watching. Before each emotional moment, she checked her audience. It was a performance polished and practiced, and everyone was buying it except me. I also watched our mother. Every time Candace touched her shoulder or leaned close to whisper something, our mother flinched. It was subtle, a slight tension in her body, a flicker of something dark in her eyes, but it was there. Our mother was afraid of Candace, genuinely afraid, and she had been for a long time. Our father was harder to read. He smiled at Candace's stories, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He watched her with a quiet suspicion that he had clearly suppressed for years. He knew something was wrong with his younger daughter. He just didn't have the words for it yet. The Daltons were there too. Rick sat stiffly, barely eating, while Linda, pale and thin from her cancer treatment, observed everything with sharp, intelligent eyes. At one point during dessert, I passed behind her chair on my way to the kitchen. Without looking at me, she pressed something into my hand. A folded napkin. I slipped it into my pocket and kept walking. Later in the bathroom, I unfolded it. A phone number was written in shaky handwriting, along with 3 words, "Call me private." Linda knew. Somehow she knew about her husband and my sister, and she wanted to talk. After dinner, as guests began to leave, Candace found me on the back porch. "Walk with me," she said, nodding toward the lake behind our parents' property. "We should talk. Just us." Her voice was sweet, sisterly, completely fake. I should have refused, but I wanted to understand what she was doing, what she wanted from me. So I followed her down the path to the water's edge, where the evening mist was already rising off the surface. Candace turned to face me, and her mask slipped just enough for me to see the calculation underneath. "You're going to keep your mouth shut about what you saw," she said. It wasn't a question. "You're going to smile and play nice and let everyone think you're the jealous, bitter older sister who never got enough attention. Because if you don't, I will make your life very difficult." I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give her the reaction she was clearly expecting. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw, Candace. Rick's wife is dying. What you're doing is wrong." Something flickered in her eyes. Frustration, maybe even panic. This wasn't going according to her plan. She had expected me to yell, to accuse, to give her ammunition she could use against me later. But I wasn't playing the part she had written for me. So she improvised. One moment we were standing face to face. The next, her hands were on my chest, shoving hard. I stumbled backward, my foot caught on a root, and I fell into the lake. The water was shockingly cold, filling my nose and mouth, dragging at my clothes. I thrashed to the surface, gasping and choking. Candace stood on the shore, perfectly dry, perfectly calm, but her voice was shaking with anger when she spoke. "You were supposed to lose it. You were supposed to scream and make a scene so everyone would see how crazy you are. Why can't you just play your part?" For the first time since I'd arrived, my sister looked rattled. Her trap had failed. I hadn't given her what she needed, but as I dragged myself out of the water, shivering and soaked, neither of us noticed the figure watching from the window of the house next door. Eleanor Brooks had seen everything. I made it back to my childhood bedroom, soaking wet and shivering, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely think. I changed into dry clothes and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. My sister had pushed me into a lake. Not in anger, not in a moment of passion, but because I had failed to react the way she wanted. I was supposed to scream and make a scene. I was supposed to look crazy. That was her plan all along. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping at my window. My heart jumped into my throat, but when I pulled back the curtain, I saw an elderly woman's face illuminated by the porch light from next door. Eleanor Brooks. She was 68 years old, a widow who had lived beside my parents for over a decade. I had always thought of her as a quiet, pleasant neighbor who kept to herself. I had no idea she was about to change my life. I opened the window, and Eleanor spoke quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw everything that happened at the lake, and my security camera recorded it." She held up a small USB drive. "I have the footage right here, your sister pushing you into the water, the whole thing." I stared at her, not quite believing what I was hearing. Eleanor climbed through my window with surprising agility for her age and sat down in my desk chair, her eyes sharp and knowing. "I've been watching your family for years," she said. "I never wanted to interfere. But tonight, when I saw what she did to you, I knew I had to speak up." She paused, studying my face. "Your sister didn't look surprised when she pushed you. She looked frustrated, like a plan had gone wrong. I've seen that look before." There was something in her voice that made me ask, "What do you mean you've seen it before?" Eleanor's face tightened with old pain. 15 years ago, my own daughter did the same thing to me. The manipulation, the lies, the gaslighting. She made everyone think I was losing my mind. She convinced my husband to give her power of attorney, and then she drained our savings and disappeared. I lost everything because I didn't see the pattern until it was too late. She leaned forward. "But I see it now, and I see it in your sister." The weight of her words settled over me. Eleanor wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor of the same kind of predator. Should I go to the police? I asked. I have video evidence of assault now. Eleanor considered the question carefully before answering. You could, and you'd probably win. But think about what happens next. Your mother would blame you forever for destroying the family. Your father might retreat from the scandal and shut down completely. Candace would hire an expensive lawyer and play the victim. She'd drag it through the courts for years, twisting everything until you're exhausted and broke. You'd win the legal case, but you'd lose everything else. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. There's another way. Make your family see the truth themselves. When they witness it with their own eyes, when the evidence is undeniable, they can't blame you. They can only blame her. I thought about my mother's trembling hands, my father's suppressed suspicion. Eleanor was right. If I went to the police, my family would circle the wagons around Candace, and I would be cast out forever as the traitor who brought shame upon them. But if they saw the truth for themselves, if they couldn't deny it, everything would be different. I remembered the napkin in my pocket, the one Linda Dalton had pressed into my hand at dinner. At 6 a.m, after a sleepless night, I called the number. Linda answered on the first ring as if she had been sitting by the phone waiting. I knew you'd call, she said. Her voice was weak but steady. I've known about Rick and your sister for 4 months. I've been gathering evidence, but I'm too sick to fight alone. My heart was pounding. How did you find out? Linda let out a bitter laugh. I found texts on Rick's phone, messages from 8 months ago, right after his father died. Your sister reached out to him within days of the funeral. The first message she sent was asking how much he inherited. She paused to catch her breath. This isn't love, Brittany. This isn't even passion. Your sister is a predator. She targeted Rick because his father just left him $800,000. She approached him at his most vulnerable when he was grieving, and I was starting chemotherapy. She knew exactly what she was doing. I felt sick to my stomach. She's after his inheritance. That's only part of it, Linda continued. I've been watching her, the way she operates, the timing, the manipulation. I think she's running the same game on your family. Your parents have assets, don't they? A house, retirement savings. She coughed, and I could hear how much this conversation was costing her. Your sister isn't just greedy. She's systematic, and I suspect you're standing in her way. Everything clicked into place. Candace wasn't just having an affair. She was positioning herself to inherit Rick's money while simultaneously securing our parents' estate. And I was the obstacle she needed to remove, not physically, but socially. If she could make everyone believe I was unstable, jealous, and delusional, no one would listen to me when the truth finally came out. That morning, Candace made her next move. She found our mother in the kitchen and put on a tearful performance. I'm really worried about Brittany. She's been saying strange things, making wild accusations. Last night she followed me to the lake and started screaming at me for no reason. I think she might need professional help. An hour later, my mother approached me with shaking hands and pleading eyes. Brittany, honey, maybe you should talk to someone, a professional, just to sort through whatever you're going through. She swallowed hard. If you have nothing to hide, why would you resist? I recognized the trap immediately. If I refused to see a psychiatrist, I would look like I had something to hide. If I agreed anything I said about Candace could be dismissed as symptoms of mental illness. Either way, Candace won. She was building a paper trail to discredit me, and our mother was helping her do it. But I wasn't powerless anymore. I had Eleanor and her video footage. I had Linda and her knowledge of Candace's financial scheme. And I had my own skills. That afternoon, I went to the county records office and looked up probate filings. It's public information in Ohio, anyone can access it. I confirmed what Linda had told me Rick Dalton inherited. Exactly $800,000 from his father's estate, and the inheritance was finalized 2 weeks before Candace suddenly reappeared in his life after years of no contact. I also researched Ohio's recording laws. We're a one-party consent state, which means I could legally record any conversation I was part of without telling the other person. Armed with this knowledge, I found Candace alone on the back porch that evening. I made myself look defeated, broken, like I had finally accepted that no one would believe me. Can I ask you something? I said quietly. Do you even love Rick? Or is this just a game to you? Candace looked at me with contempt and amusement. She thought she had won. Love, she laughed. Rick is a lottery ticket. Linda's dying anyway. I'll be there to comfort him when she's gone, and then I'll comfort his money." She smiled that cold smile. "You should have stayed quiet, Brittany. Now it's too late for you." She walked away, never noticing that my phone was recording every word. I finally had ammunition. But I still didn't understand why our mother obeyed Candace so completely. What secret could possibly make a mother betray her own daughter? The answer was closer than I knew. I moved into Eleanor's guest room the next day. I couldn't stay under the same roof as Candace, not while I was building my case against her. Eleanor welcomed me without hesitation, and together with Linda, we spent the following days organizing evidence and planning our next move. But the question that haunted me most still had no answer. Why did my mother obey Candace so completely? What power did my sister hold over the woman who gave us both life? On the third day, my father found me at Eleanor's house. He looked like he had aged 10 years since the birthday dinner. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. Eleanor let him in, and he sat down across from me at her kitchen table, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I know you're telling the truth," he said. His voice was heavy with exhaustion, and something else relief. Maybe that he could finally say these words out loud. "I've known what Candace is for 15 years. I just didn't have the courage to do anything about it." I stared at him, not sure whether to feel grateful or furious. 15 years. You knew for 15 years, and you never said anything. He nodded slowly, shame written across his face. "When Candace was 19, she stole $5,000 from my retirement account. She did it through an online transfer and then blamed it on computer hackers. She cried and swore she had nothing to do with it, and your mother believed her completely. But I checked the records. I traced the transfer. The money went directly into an account Candace had opened under a fake name." My stomach turned. $5,000. When I was struggling to pay for my own college textbooks, my sister had been stealing from our parents. "What happened when you confronted her?" "I tried," my father said. "But when I told your mother what I had found, she became hysterical. She begged me to let it go, to pretend it never happened. She said if I pushed the issue, it would tear our family apart. She was terrified, Brittany. Not angry, not defensive, terrified. Like she was afraid of what Candace might do." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't understand it then. Your mother has been afraid of Candace for as long as I can remember. I never knew why until I started paying closer attention." The next day, my father returned with the rest of the story. He sat in the same chair, looking even more broken than before, and told me the truth that had poisoned our family for over 3 decades. "There's something I never told you," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. 15 years ago, I discovered that your mother had a brief affair. It happened before you were born, when we were going through a very rough patch in our marriage. We nearly divorced. She made a terrible mistake, and when I found out years later, I was devastated. But I loved her. I forgave her. We rebuilt our marriage and moved forward." He paused, gathering himself. "But somehow Candace found out. I don't know how. Maybe she overheard a conversation. Maybe she found old letters. But she discovered the secret, and she's been holding it over your mother ever since." I felt the room spinning around me. Candace has been blackmailing Mom. My father nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Every time your mother tried to set boundaries with Candace, every time she tried to say no or discipline her, Candace threatened to reveal everything. She threatened to tell you and destroy your relationship with your mother. She threatened to tell the whole town and make your mother a pariah. She threatened to tear our family apart." His voice broke. "Your mother has been a hostage in her own home for 15 years. She hasn't been choosing Candace over you. She's been trying to survive." Everything I thought I knew about my family shifted in that moment. My mother wasn't the villain. She wasn't the enabler who loved my sister more than me. She was Candace's first victim, trapped by fear and shame, forced to watch helplessly as her younger daughter manipulated everyone around her. The favoritism, the protection, the desperate defense of Candace's behavior, it was all survival. My mother had been drowning for 15 years, and none of us had seen it. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Eleanor helped me organize the evidence. Linda provided her testimony and the text messages she had found on Rick's phone. My father gave me copies of the bank records from when Candace stole his retirement money, and I had my own recordings, Candace's voice clear as day calling Rick a lottery ticket and laughing about Linda's illness. On the sixth day, I orchestrated the confrontation. I chose the moment carefully waiting until Rick was visiting the house, ensuring maximum witnesses and maximum impact. When I walked through my parents' front door, everyone was gathered in the living room, my mother, my father, Candace, and Rick. They all looked up in surprise. Candace's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Brittany," my mother started. "We weren't expecting—" "I know," I said calmly, "but it's time for everyone to see the truth." I connected my phone to the television and played Eleanor's security footage first. The room went silent as they watched Candace push me into the lake. My mother gasped. My father's jaw tightened. Rick went pale. Candace opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "There's more." I played the audio recording next. Candace's voice filled the room, dripping with contempt. "Love Rick is a lottery ticket. Linda's dying anyway. I'll be there to comfort him when she's gone, and then I'll comfort his money." My mother started crying. Rick looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Candace's face twisted with rage. I presented the county records showing Rick's inheritance timeline, proving that Candace had reappeared in his life exactly 2 weeks after he received $800,000. I shared Linda's testimony about the text messages Candace had sent, asking about the inheritance amount, before she even pretended to care about Rick. Then I turned to my mother. "I know what Candace has been holding over you for 15 years. I know about the affair, and I know you've been afraid." I walked over and took her trembling hands in mine. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Dad forgave you a long time ago. I forgive you now. Candace can't hurt you with this secret because it's not a secret anymore." My mother collapsed into sobs, 15 years of terror releasing at once. My father moved to hold her, and for the first time in my memory, they looked like partners instead of prisoners. Candace tried one last desperate move. "You have no proof I knew about any affair. This is all lies and manipulation." But my father cut her off, his voice harder than I had ever heard it. "I have proof. Bank records from when you stole $5,000 from my retirement account. Your mother begged me to destroy them, but I kept copies. I knew this day would come." Candace looked around the room, searching for an ally, searching for someone who would believe her, protect her, take her side. For the first time in her life, she found no one. That's when Rick broke. Seeing his meal ticket collapsing, he scrambled to save himself. "It was all her idea," he shouted, pointing at Candace. "She told me to meet her at her parents' house that day. She said her sister would find us and make a scene, yell and accuse and look crazy. Then everyone would see how jealous and unstable Brittany was. I didn't know she would push her in the lake. I didn't sign up for assault." His confession confirmed everything. I was never a surprise witness. I was the target. The whole thing had been staged from the beginning. The following day, Linda filed for divorce. Her lawyer cited dissipation of marital assets. Rick had spent their money on gifts for Candace during the affair. In our small town, word spread instantly. Rick's real estate clients started canceling. His business partner called an emergency meeting. Rick hadn't lost his license, but he had lost something far more valuable, his reputation. And in small-town Ohio, reputation is everything. Candace watched her carefully constructed empire crumble in a single week. But my sister was not the type to accept defeat quietly. Desperate people never surrender. They self-destruct, and they try to take everyone down with them. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Candace made her final move. Like all desperate people who refuse to accept defeat, she chose to burn everything down rather than admit she had lost. She wrote a lengthy post on Facebook painting herself as the victim of a jealous older sister and a family that had turned against her for no reason. "I'm being punished for being the successful one," she wrote. "My sister has always been envious of me, and now she's convinced my parents to believe her lies." The post went viral in our small community within hours, but not in the way Candace intended. The first comment came from Rachel Martinez. Rachel, the crazy, jealous friend who had disappeared from Candace's life 10 years ago. The woman in the photograph I had seen on my parents' mantle. "Candace did the exact same thing to me," Rachel wrote. "She seduced my husband, and when I confronted her, she told everyone I was mentally unstable. I lost my marriage, my friends, my reputation. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to believe me. Thank you, Brittany Shaw, for finally exposing the truth." More comments followed. Another woman named Jennifer wrote that Candace had tried the same thing with her fiancé 5 years ago. A woman named Maria shared that Candace had borrowed $3,000 and never repaid it, then told everyone Maria was obsessive when she asked for the money back. A former coworker revealed that Candace had been fired for stealing from the cash register, but had somehow convinced the manager not to press charges. Then someone shared a screenshot. The text message Candace had sent to Rick 8 months ago, just days after his father died. How much did he leave you? We should celebrate your good fortune together. The timestamp was clear. The calculation was undeniable. A decade of victims finally speaking out. A pattern that no one could deny. Candace wasn't a misunderstood woman being persecuted by a jealous sister. She was a predator with a long history of manipulation and destruction, and now everyone knew it. Candace deleted her post within hours. Then she deleted her entire Facebook account. But screenshots live forever, especially in a small town where everyone knows everyone. Within days, Candace Shaw became the cautionary tale that mothers warned their daughters about. The woman you don't trust. The woman you don't invite to parties. The woman whose calls you don't return. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling something I didn't expect. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just a quiet sense of justice finally being served, not by my hand, but by the truth itself. My parents' marriage did not survive intact. My father moved into the guest bedroom the week after the confrontation. He told me what he had said to my mother. Candace used your secret to control you. I understand that. I forgave you for the affair years ago, but I cannot forgive how you let her use it against our daughter. For 15 years, you watched Brittany be dismissed and gaslit and pushed aside. You said nothing. Your fear is understandable. Your choices are not. My mother began therapy the following week. A month later, she sent me a letter. It was not an apology. It said she's asking for forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of the favoritism, the silence, the betrayal, the years of choosing her own comfort over my well-being. She wrote about how afraid she had been, how trapped. But she also wrote that fear did not excuse what she had allowed to happen to me. She took responsibility without making excuses. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer and did not respond. Some wounds take years to heal, not weeks. I was not ready to forgive, and I refused to pretend otherwise. A few days later, I sent my mother a single text message. I'll consider rebuilding our relationship when I see sustained change. Actions, not words. That will take time. Maybe years. That's my boundary. For the first time in her life, my mother learned what it felt like to wait for a daughter who might never come back. It was the same feeling I had lived with for 36 years. Linda's divorce proceedings moved forward steadily. Her lawyer built a strong case around the dissipation of marital assets, Rick spending their shared money on gifts and trips with Candace, while Linda was fighting cancer. The judge in our small town knew exactly who Rick was and what he had done. There was no sympathy in that courtroom. Rick's real estate business collapsed within weeks. Clients canceled their contracts. His business partner dissolved their arrangement. The phone stopped ringing. In a profession built entirely on trust and reputation, Rick had neither left. He sold his house at a significant loss and relocated to another state, hoping to start over somewhere no one knew his name. Linda kept their home. She was still fighting cancer, but now she was fighting with dignity. She sent me a card a few weeks after Rick left town. You gave me courage when I had none. I was waiting for months for someone strong enough to stand with me. You were that person. Thank you for helping me save myself. I cried when I read those words, not from sadness, but from the realization that my suffering had meant something. By standing up for myself, I had helped someone else find the strength to do the same. My relationship with my father grew stronger in the months that followed. We talked on the phone every week, real conversations about real things. He had stopped enabling my mother's denial, stopped pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. For the first time in my life, my father saw me clearly, and he let me know that he was proud of who I had become. With my mother, I maintained firm boundaries. Monthly check-ins by phone, no visits yet, and rebuilding, only if I saw real change in her behavior. I'm not punishing you, I told her during one of our calls. I'm protecting myself. Those are 2 very different things. With Candace, there was nothing. No blocking on social media, no dramatic final confrontation, no closure speech. I simply stopped acknowledging her existence. She ceased to be part of my world, not because I hated her, but because I no longer needed anything from her. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even revenge. I needed peace, and peace meant letting go. Eleanor became my family. Every Sunday I drove to her house and we shared tea on her porch, watching the birds and talking about everything and nothing. One afternoon she said something that stayed with me. Blood makes relatives. Choice makes family. You didn't choose your sister Brittany, but you can choose who deserves your presence. She was right. I had spent 36 years waiting for people who couldn't see me, hoping that if I was quiet enough and good enough, they would finally recognize my worth. I was wrong. Some people don't see you because they choose not to. And no amount of silence or sacrifice will ever change that. Candace built her empire on manipulation, on secrets and fear, and making others feel small so she could feel powerful. I didn't destroy her. I simply stopped being afraid of her. And the moment I stopped being afraid, her power disappeared. My mother was a victim too. That doesn't erase what she allowed to happen to me, but it helps me understand. Forgiveness isn't my priority right now. Healing is. Maybe one day I'll be ready to rebuild that relationship. Maybe I won't. Either way, that's my choice now. I found family in unexpected places. Eleanor, who saw me when no one else did. Linda, who needed the same courage I needed. My father, who finally woke up. They remind me that love isn't supposed to be earned through suffering. It isn't supposed to make you invisible. I wasted 36 years waiting to be seen by people who refused to look. I won't waste another day. From that day forward, no one would ever push me underwater again in any sense of the word. Not because they couldn't try, but because I finally knew how to swim. Thank you for staying with me through Brittany's entire journey. Her story carries lessons that many of us need to hear, especially those who have spent years being quiet and waiting for the people we love to finally see our worth. The first lesson is this: silence does not earn respect. Many of us were raised to believe that if we just kept the peace and put others first, we would eventually be valued. Brittany believed that for 36 years. It never worked. Some people will never see your worth, no matter how much you sacrifice. That is not your failure. That is their choice. The second lesson is about recognizing manipulation. If someone in your life makes you feel crazy for seeing what you clearly saw, if they twist your words and turn others against you, if they punish you for having boundaries, pay attention. That is not love. That is control, and you deserve better. The third lesson is perhaps the most important. You have the right to protect yourself, even from family. Brittany did not destroy Candace. She simply stopped protecting her sister from the consequences of her own actions. She stopped being afraid, and she set boundaries that put her own healing first. That is not selfish. That is survival. Finally, remember that family is not only about blood. Brittany found her true family in Eleanor, Linda, and her father, who finally woke up. The people who choose to stand with you, who see you and support you without conditions, those are your real family. If this story touched your heart or gave you strength for battles, you are still fighting. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who tried to make you invisible? Have you found your chosen family? I want to hear your story. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are not invisible. You never were.